Hello. If you're currently trying to write a fantasy novel and you're a little bit lost in your world building, your character development, your magic system, you're lost in the plot, you don't know what's going on, and you can't see the finish line, or you can't even see the starting line, this video is for you. And normally my videos are based on blog posts that I've written that I link in the description. And this video is no different. But what is different about this video is that just like my other videos where like the educational ones like give you step-by-step guides on how to accomplish something, like how to world build, how to write romantasy, how to do this, that. This is gonna be more how I did it, how I personally, from start to finish, how I got my ideas and the steps that I took to be able to start writing my fantasy novel. It's all gonna be like first person, very personal story. But what I'm not going to do is give you a lot of details about the story that I'm currently working on because A, I don't want to give too much away. B, if I ever try to go the traditional publishing route, I know that publishers don't like it when you've divulged too much information about your book online prior to going trad publishing. So, not that I'm going to do trad, I think I'm going to do self-publishing. But either way, I don't want to screw myself over in the long run. So another thing I should tell you is that I might put on some accents. Might be some British accents. It might be some Borat accents. It might be Spanish. It might be French. I like doing accents is what I'm trying to say. And if I offend anybody, I am sorry. I am not trying to be offensive. I just love doing accents. Shall we begin? If you're new here, my name is Rita. I'm an aspiring fantasy author, and I'm currently working on a novel that is loosely based on the story of Mulan. And I have a degree in English literature, which means that I know what I'm talking about. I spent years analyzing stories, analyzing plot structure, analyzing character development, and I've spent the past couple of years obsessing over world building and magic system building and all of that fun stuff. I have a little bit of credibility. Okay, so without further ado, let me tell you how I go about writing a fantasy novel. So the first thing is that I think of a what if scenario. So this is basically the premise of your story. And for me, what it was for this particular novel that I'm writing based on Mulan, I was like, okay, what if this happened instead of this? I thought of that while I was watching Mulan for the 700th time. And I was like, ooh, that is a good idea for a story. That is a cool premise for a story. So I would tell you, if I'm advising you on how to start writing a fantasy novel, is think of a really cool, unique premise for a story. And it could start with a what if question. Like, what if the moon was a prison? What if the sun never set on this particular kingdom? What would happen? You know, questions like that. That'll be the premise of your story. The second thing that I thought about after I had that figured out, I needed to decide on the subgenre and I needed to decide the audience that I'm writing for, because those things determine the tone of your story, okay? If you want to write a YA fantasy novel, it's going to be completely different than if you're writing like an epic fantasy for adult readers, especially if you're going to be including, let's say, spice in your novel. You cannot do explicit spice in a YA novel. It's not appropriate for the audience. That's not what they're expecting to read when they pick up your book. So you need to figure this out so that you understand what the reader expectation is from you. Another thing to think about is word count. So specific subgenres have their own word count. So fantasy in general, if you're going to be traditionally publishing, they allow you to write a little bit more than other genres, right? So the word count normally is between, I think, 100 and 120,000. But it also depends on your subgenre. So YA, I think, has lower word count than adult fantasy. So you just want to look into those things just to set expectations for yourself and to know what the expectation of the reader is when they pick up your novel. Once I had that figured out, which is, by the way, I'm going for adult epic fantasy. So after that, I really had to think about my primary characters. The protagonist, obviously, is the first person that I mapped out. So what you want to do, especially for your protagonist, but also for your other primary characters, including your villain and whatever, but the main thing that you want to do for your protagonist is figure out what their goal is. And I'm not talking about, I mean, obviously the end goal eventually is to, if you have a villain, is to defeat the villain. That's not the goal that I'm talking about. The goal has to be something personal to your protagonist, okay? So you got to figure out what that is. You got to figure out what their biggest flaws are. And what's going to happen is their biggest flaws are going to get in the way of their personal goals a lot, okay? So figure out what their goals are, figure out what their flaws are. And you're also going to try to figure out what the stakes are. So what do they have to lose? What is the biggest thing that they have to lose? Figure those things out, especially for your protagonist, but also for any other primary side characters that you have. What I did after that is I figured out what the theme of my story is. And I want to caveat this by saying that the theme that you think that you're writing about might change halfway through or at the end of your novel. Like while you're writing, the theme that you originally were going for might change, and that is okay. Okay, nothing is set in stone. And like a massive caveat that I should give for this entire video is that nothing is set in stone. You are allowed to change whatever you want. It's your story. You do whatever you want, whenever you want. As long as nobody else has read it, as long as you're the only person who's reading and writing your novel, do whatever you want, change whatever you want. What difference is it going to make in anybody else's life? Okay? So decide on the theme of your story. The theme can be, oh my God, sorry, I just switched screens and like my eyes were like, I wrote down like a few themes that I wanted to mention. So a theme can be either power and corruption, or it could be revenge and justice, or it could be good versus evil, which is like a classic one, obviously. Identity and belonging, grief and survival, love and betrayal, found family versus blood family, survival and resilience. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the theme of your story. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the blog post that this video is based off of is going to be linked in the description, and you can go and find all of the details there. And I do encourage you to do that. So once I determined the theme of my story, then the fun part begins, which is world building. I'm going to do another caveat here because world building can be a major time suck. The first story that I had started writing a few years ago that I paused, I spent 8 months world building that. And once I started writing, I realized that like I didn't have to go that deep to begin writing. I didn't need all of those things for act 1 of my story. And I regretted having spent that much time agonizing over every detail. When I started writing my second novel, the one that I'm working on now, I was like, okay, Rita, you're going to get the world building basics down, and then you'll build as you go. And so, okay, I guess this is going to be a product plug for myself. When I first started writing fantasy, all of this world building and character and plot and magic system design and all this stuff, I had it in an actual notebook. I actually have that notebook here. I had it in this notebook, which I still use sometimes, but I had it in this notebook because there is value in writing things by hand because it helps you retain information more. But then trying to find anything is a goddamn nightmare. So I started writing in a notebook, and then I started writing in a Google Doc. No, it does not work for fantasy writing, okay? It does not work when you're making up entire worlds with their own cultures and their religion and their own species and their own magical creatures and its own magic system and a million other things. It is just not feasible to do all of that in a Google Doc or in a notebook. So what I did was, at the time I was working for a tech company and I was familiar with Notion. It's basically like a project management kind of app, and let's say Google Drive all in one, where you can organize all aspects of your business and you can interconnect everything and you can assign like tasks to people and you can add files and everything is saved in the same place. So I was like, okay, I had that in the back of my mind. And I tried a bunch of like world building and fantasy writing apps. And then I was like, you know what? Why don't I take Notion and build my own world building system and my own novel planning system inside Notion. So I created these mini databases for everything that I needed. So a database for characters, a database for cultures, a database for my magic system, a database for my religion, a database for my fantasy creatures, a database for my plot and chapters and this and that. And then I interconnected everything and I started filling it out while I was writing this novel, the one that's based on Mulan. And it was so helpful to have all of my ideas organized that way. And the fact that I didn't have to go back and try to find something and make a change in one place and then go and find the other place where this is mentioned and update that as well. Like, I didn't have to do any of that because anything that's relevant to something else is interconnected, especially in my template that I created. So you update one thing, everything else gets updated. If you want to search for something, you just search for something and you'll find where it is. Sorry I plugged that in, but it is genuinely something that helped me so much when it came to world building and for organizing my ideas and just a place to dump everything that was in my head about this story. If you're interested in that, I will link that world building and story planning system in the description below. Okay? What was I talking about? World building basics. Yes. So this time around, what I did was, instead of planning all aspects of world building, what I did was I planned the geography and not the entire world. Wherever my story starts, I planned the geography of that area and anything around it that was close by that would affect the story in Act 1. Okay, so I figured all of that out. So just the basics of geography. If you already have it all planned out in your head, like what everything is, go ahead and obviously map that out as well. But if you don't, and if you only have like what's relevant to the beginning of the story, that is completely fine to start writing your novel. Then what I figured out is the power structures. So who's in charge? What does the government look like? Who has power? Who makes the laws? Magic users, do they have higher status than non-magic? Like, I figured out all of the power structures in my story. Once I did that, I moved on to obviously like culture and religion. I basically figured out whatever I needed, just enough to support my story, especially to support Act 1 of my story. I was too scared of going too deep like I did previously. So I just built everything, all the basics that I needed to go ahead and start writing my story, okay? Don't get stuck in this like world building procrastination hole. Once you're done with the basics of world building, what I figured out afterward was the magic system. The magic system, you're actually going to want to go a little bit deep, and I'll explain why. Because if you don't have the rules, the limitations, and the costs figured out from the beginning, eventually when you're writing, there's going to be too many inconsistencies if you don't have your magic system figured out properly. There's going to be people using magic in different ways. You're going to be like, oh, what was the cost of this? What was the limit of this type of magic system? And then things are just not going to add up in the end. And you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to rewrite everything. Everything that has to do with magic, you're going to have to rebuild that. So the one thing you should absolutely have figured out is your magic system, costs, limits, rules, the source of your magic, and the impact it has on society. What was really important for me is, are magic users, do they have a higher status? Or you need to figure out, is magic outlawed? If people use it, do they go to jail? Do they die for it? So you have to figure out what are the biggest impacts that magic has in your society. I'm going to mention my world building system again. Sorry. Obviously, I do sell it, so I understand that this sounds like an ad, but this is genuinely what I used, and this is what helped me start writing my fantasy novel faster than I would have with a notebook or with a Google Doc, okay? So in my fantasy world building Notion template, there is a whole database for magic systems and for world building obviously as well. And they each have guided prompts in there. So all the questions that I asked myself that were important for me to build these things, I put all of those prompts in the template so that you basically have a guided way to build these things out. So it's all the most important questions you need to ask yourself to have a completed magic system or to have a complete world. Once I had all the basics down, I went back and I added more in-depth questions. Like once I decided to sell this template, I decided to add more in-depth questions, but you don't have to fill them all out when you're first starting to build or when you first want to start writing your fantasy novel. You just fill out whatever you need to start writing, and you can leave the rest for later. And I included status updates too to those prompts, so you could just put the status as "we'll decide later" or "circle back later." So that's that for the magic system. So once I had that figured out, Then came outlining my plot. And I know outlining scares a lot of fantasy writers because they think that it's going to box them in, but I'm going to try to, not that I'm going to try to change your mind, but I'm going to tell you what absolutely worked for me. I'm not a discovery writer, which means that I can't move forward with my fantasy novel with no planning whatsoever, like just start writing and figure it out as you go. I feel like that is so hard to do, especially in the fantasy genre. Like there's too many things that can go wrong, too many plot holes that can happen if you don't have at least a little bit figured out from the beginning. I mean, if you can manage it, amazing, congratulations. It means that you're a genius who can keep all of these things in their head without any inconsistencies. I envy that, but I am not that person. I have a million reminders that go off in a day to tell me like what I need to be doing or where I need to be going or what time it is, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so for me, and this is something that my editor actually recommended to me after she had read the draft version of my last novel. She was like, Rita, did you use a beat sheet? And I was like, what? Did I use a what? What is a beat sheet, madame? And she was like, okay, I'm going to show you what it is. And then you're going to fill one out and you're going to thank me later. And holy sheesh kebabs. A beat sheet is the biggest game changer, especially for fantasy writers. I use the Save the Cat beat sheet, which originally was for screenplay, but then it got adapted for novel writing. And it has 15 beats. And what beats are, they're the major like plot points in your story that help your story propel forward. So all of the major beats of your story is what a beat sheet is. And I actually have a video. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, if you've never heard of a beat sheet before, like I hadn't heard of it like years ago, I have a video that explains exactly what a beat sheet is. You'll find the link to that in the description below. It basically starts off with the opening image. So what your protagonist's life looked like before they got bamboozled by the inciting incident. So their normal life, and each beat after that propels the story forward. So there's the opening, and then eventually you'll hit the inciting incident, which is like a major thing that happens to them that completely derails their life. And they have to make a decision, like, are they going to go on this quest or are they not going to, all this stuff. That is something that I filled out and it changed my freaking life. Changed my author life. And I sound like a broken record, but a beat sheet is also part of my Notion world building template that I was mentioning earlier. So I put that in there because it's actually like one of the most important things that you need to fill out if you're planning on at least a little bit outlining your story. So I did that. And then I went a little bit deeper than that. And I also outlined my chapters. I didn't outline them fully because, again, I didn't want to lose the excitement of writing those chapters. But what I did is I have a few bullet points per chapter that I want to hit, just as a guide, so I know what I need to be writing for each chapter. Okay, so beat sheet and a loose chapter outline is what worked for me. Once I had those things figured out, the simplest answer to how to write a fantasy novel is to write a fantasy novel. Okay, just start writing it. Once you have the basics of your world figured out, once you have your characters figured out, your magic system figured out, and once you have a loose outline, friggin' write your story, okay? Open the Google Docs or the Word. Open those things and start writing your story. Draft it. Write in an ugly manner. It doesn't matter. Just start writing. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect, okay? I don't think even like super established authors are able to write perfectly for their first draft. It's just write messily as long as you start writing. Eventually, you're going to go back and you're going to edit everything. You're going to edit, you're going to edit, you're going to edit, you're going to get an editor, they're going to edit. It's going to be a whole thing. As long as you're the only person reading your first draft, who cares what it looks like? You just need to get your story down. Otherwise, you're never going to start. If you're aiming for perfection on your first draft, you're not going to achieve it, okay? And you're not going to write your novel. This is the accents that I'm talking about that I like to do. If there are things that you haven't figured out, if there are names that you haven't figured out, if there are even concepts and stuff that you haven't figured out, use placeholders. That's what I do all of the time. And then I basically highlight them in like hot pink, just so I know while I'm rereading that I have to go back and fix those things. And consistency matters over quality at this stage. And that's it. If you read the blog, I also go into revisions and then choosing if you want to go trad or self-publishing. So yeah, I hope that you found this video useful. This is my authentic journey of how I write my fantasy novels. These are the exact steps that I go through. Again, if you want a more detailed view of how this works with a bunch of examples, the blog post that this video is based on is linked in the description below. And if you're interested at all in the fantasy world building and story planning template that I created in Notion, again, I know that I'm promoting it and it's my product. And of course I'm going to be promoting it. But I originally built it for myself. And it was so freaking helpful that I'm like, yo, we're going to share this. But it did take me months to put together. So I'm like, we are going to charge for these. Anyways, if you are interested in that system, that's also going to be linked in the description below. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe to my channel, because I post videos about world building, about fantasy writing, about character development, all of that fun stuff pretty regularly. And I would love to know what your experience has been trying to write a fantasy novel. I would like to know what your blocks are, what your process is, all of that fun stuff. So leave that in the comments below. I read every single comment. I try to respond to every single comment. So go ahead and do that. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time. Bye.